Welcome, friends. We are in our last week of programming basics. It's our second week, week two, day one. We've got a little bit of a busy schedule, so we're going to get started here at the very beginning of this. And this is most instructors will do this, is do a little bit of housekeeping. I sent out a reminder of on Friday, and this is something you'll normally get to where if you haven't done your discussion question or you haven't finished enough core assignments, you're going to get this automated reminder. What that means is, oh man, I just clicked out of my thing. Give me 1 second. What that means is that we have this automated system where we can pull, scrape, and see what you've completed and what you've done. And if you haven't gotten to a point where you have finished this or gotten to a point where you are ready to kind of move on to the next week, it's not that you're in trouble or anything, because you obviously have the weekend. Everything was due Sunday at 11:59 p.m. It's just simply a reminder. There's nothing, you're not in trouble. There's nothing there other than it's just a reminder of, hey, don't forget you have discussion questions. Don't forget that you have some assignments that you need to get done by Sunday. And then on Monday morning, what we'll do is we'll pull all of that information. And then that's when, some of you guys got an automated message today that said, hey, you haven't done anything, or, here's your status, you're in good status, et cetera, et cetera. So you will normally get those on Fridays from instructors. Again, they're semi-automated. So we go in and we do that. We basically check the numbers. And if you're good, then you won't receive anything. You won't receive any sort of email. But if you do receive an email, it is nothing other than a, hey, don't forget about this, because we know life is busy, life gets crazy. So go ahead and do that. Just as a reminder, you've got some discussion questions due this week. Now, I met with some of my, or met with my bosses and was kind of talking about how it is a lot of information for you guys, a lot of assignments, a lot of everything. And so we were able to come to a conclusion where I was able to kind of push your stuff by a day. And so everything was due Wednesday, 11:59 p.m. We're able to talk, and our bosses were very, very happy to extend this until Thursday. And so now we've got Thursday end of day is when everything is due. So it gives you an extra day. It gets you an extra day for the exam. It gets you an extra day for assignments. It gets you extra day for discussion questions. And so if you guys are stressed about it, hopefully this helps you. If you really, really, really are stressed and you're having like a panic attack, please talk to me. That's the last thing that's the last thing we need. Now, just as a kind of let you know, this is a large class. And so I've gotten a ton of emails over the weekend. So I've been working through them. And this morning, early in the morning, I emailed everybody that had emailed me. So I'm still working through your emails. So, you got to give me about 24 hours, but especially if it is something that's urgent, maybe put urgent in the subject, and then I can kind of look at that and tailor that accordingly. So yeah, just wanted to let you guys know assignments, discussions, and the exam is due by end of day Thursday, no longer Wednesday. So that gives you guys an extra day to do that, but you still need to get things done. So please, please, please make sure you guys are working through that. The last thing I want is for you guys to have to retake. Retake's $500, which is a lot of money, in my opinion. I don't know unless you got it like that. But it's $500. So I want to make sure that you guys don't have to do that. Even just missing discussion questions, even if you've done everything else, you have to have the Trinity, the trifecta, discussions, exam, and discussions, exam, and assignments as well. So please make sure you do that. There's a great question in chat. Will we have a lecture next Thursday, July 4th, or will it be rescheduled? So if you guys are with me, we're actually rescheduling that because that is a holiday and you shouldn't have to do it. And I'm not working. So we're going to reschedule that. We'll have a different altered schedule. If you guys don't have me, or if you go to another instructor, what we will do is each on Friday, you'll receive a class similar to kind of my welcome email, same sort of thing, but you'll get a class calendar, and that class calendar will note when your classes are. And then again, if you're coming from me, then I will in the email say, just as a note for the calendar, please note that our first class on Tuesday is going to be pushed. I think we're going to do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday as a class. That's what we'll kind of just push it a day and then just have a Friday lecture. It's always recorded. So if you're like, Friday night is my night, then that's okay. You don't have to come there. Yeah. So please know that. Okay. Great. And then with the exam, just as a reminder, now there is a little bit of a interesting situation going on with that, but this is what it should look like. I just kind of put something and click this, but when you get this algorithm.codingdojo.com/assessment, you should take you here. Now, we have had a few students that didn't have to input a new exam, especially for a retake. There's a couple of ideas that I have there, but if you do, whenever you click on this, you do have to go and put in an exam code, and that'll kind of get you there to kind of make sure that you are taking the final assessment. Now, there is a lot of questions on where does my screenshot go? You should see something for your screenshot. And if you don't, then please let me know. And Paul, you're right. I think it's here, right? On the exams, you should have take exams, and then it comes right here. You put in your code and then unlock and start, and that'll take you there. And if you didn't see that, it's not by clicking on the link per se that I sent, but go putting your code here. Yeah, perfect. Paul put that in there. This is where you'd input your code, unlock start exam, and then that will take you to this guy. But after the end, this is where you would submit your assignments, or sorry, your screenshot. Somebody asked, oh, so it's those 10 questions? Yep, it's 10 questions. Now we have multiple sets of questions, so it's not the same 10 questions. But you know, if you get a new exam code and you input it here, it will be, it's a new set of questions, basically. So it's kind of a really like just same thing, but different numbers and different kind of strategy there, different words, et cetera, et cetera. And then also as a reminder, when you unlock it for 5 hours, and I put this in the email, and as I put it as a correction, the very first thing, when you unlock it, you have 5 hours to take it as many times as you want. So it's not a one and done, and then you got to wait. You can take it as many times as you want within that 5 hours, and then your highest score goes with you. That was in our exam email, but just wanted to clarify. That you can take it as many times as you want. So it does not count as like it's just within 5 hours, and then whenever you and I put that in the email, but at the end of that 5 hours, whatever the highest score you got, that's what we take. So if you got an 8 out of 10 or above, then you're good to go. But you can take it, I mean, really, if you took it 1,000,000 times within 5 hours, we just take the highest within that 1,000,000. So yeah, I'm just looking through chat here. Yeah, so Paul's great kind of explanation. You get 3 unlocks of 5 hours. Within that 5 hours, you can take the exam as many times as you need. Cool. So somebody said, could you explain when you need to get a new code only after 5 hours? So yeah, if after the 5 hours, your score is below 8 out of 10, so a 7 out of 10 or below, then you would request a new code from Paul or I, and then we can get you a new code, and then you can start the next 5 hours. Now, remember, you get up to 3 5-hour chances, but if you wait until Thursday to do it, and it's Thursday at 9 p.m., I'm not going to, I won't be working. TAs might not be working, so you can't really get a new code that way. So you want to make sure that you are smart there. Somebody asked, what was the highest score to pass? It's a 10 out of 10 would be the highest. If you got 10 out of 10, you're good to go. If you got anything 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, you also pass. So that is, what is the highest score to pass? Yeah, it's an 8. 8 out of 10. But we're going to go through, if you haven't passed it already, we are going to do this exam. It's going to be very, I'm not allowed to call it a mock exam, but you know what I mean? I'm helping you out here a little bit. We're going to do this as a class just to really make sure that you guys do it. I try to not spoon feed you, but you know, gotta hook my people up. So, okay. Any questions on this? And then if not, I can move forward into functions, and then we'll kind of move forward into the other thing. Any questions? Okay, let's jump into functions. I want to talk about functions for because this is going to be something that you guys use all of the time. And obviously, I'm in the platform. I'm in our introduction to programming, and I'm here on the functions portion. Now, a function is a portion of code that we can quote unquote save for later. The idea behind a function is that if you've got code that you need to use a couple times, so if you find yourself always needing to find the odd number in a list, right, in an array, well, you could build out that functionality each time, but if you see yourself having to repeat yourself, right, if you keep kind of doing the same thing over and over, that's usually a pretty good indication that you can put it in a function versus having multiples of the same exact thing. What will happen is, and you can kind of see this here on the platform, is just in the same way that we've got like if and for as kind of our keywords within JavaScript, we have this keyword of function. And what that tells JavaScript is, hey, there's a function and it's everything within the curly brackets, right? So we've got an open curly bracket, we've got a closed curly bracket. Everything within that is a function. And what JavaScript does, it says, great, I will save this for later. It's a piece of code. I know that it exists. I'll save it for later. And when we, what we call the function, or say, hey, remember that piece of code that I asked you to save? Now I need you to use that. We will use the function name. So if we're looking at kind of how everything works, we've got the keyword of function followed by a function name that follows the same syntax. Remember, with variables that we have a lowercase at the beginning, and then for each new word we have an uppercase. Does anybody remember what that type is called? Like that kind of typing? Anybody remember? It's an animal. Lots of animals with the camel casing. Great job, guys. There's camel case, right? And so we follow the same thing. Then we're going to have a parenthesis. Now, right now you see that there's a word flashlight. We're going to start with nothing there. And but what this is called a parameter. So what that means is if I need something in order for my function to run, think about if I wanted to get all of the odd numbers within an array. Well, if I'm going to run that code, I need an array, right? I can't just be like odd numbers of what, right? Odd numbers of, I don't know what you need odd numbers of. And so a parameter is basically, in order for this to work, in order for this to run, I need certain things. In order for me to drive a car, I need wheels. In order for me to do X, Y, or Z, this needs to happen. And so you can think about a parameter. We'll get there. So let's go and let's build a function. So I'm in just this functions.js file, and I'm going to build my first function. I'm going to say build my first function. And my keyword is function, right? And then I'm going to say hello world. Now, there's this idea within coding. Anytime you start a new language, or really anytime you kind of do something new for the first time, I don't know why at the very beginning this is what somebody did, but you always console log or print hello world, and it's kind of like an ode to the beginning. So if you see hello world, that's like a very common thing. So we've got our function, we've got our function name here, and then we have this parenthesis, right? And this parenthesis can be what we call empty, meaning that there's nothing in there. And for right now, that's what we're going to start with. And then I have my brackets. And what I'm saying is, okay, my function of hello world, well, what do I want it to do? In this case, I just want it to console.log hello world. Perfect. Now, what this does is anytime I call the function or say, hey, code, remember this function, or I need to use this, I'm going to do whatever within my parentheses. So if I were to run this code, what do you think would happen right now? Nothing. Corey says nothing. How come? Try run it. Yeah, exactly, Andrew. Good job, guys. A function, remember, this is what we call a function declaration. So I'm declaring my function. I'm saying, hey, remember this code, but I don't want, but unless I call it, it's what we call calling the function, basically referring and telling my computer or telling my program, hey, remember that function now, go ahead and run it. Unless I do that, nothing happens, right? My code remembers it, but nothing's going to happen. So the way that I can call my function is just by, I always spell function wrong. I will always, for the rest of my life, spell function wrong. It's my kryptonite. The way that I call my function is just by doing the function name and then the parenthesis. And so now when JavaScript gets here, it's going to stop what it's doing and it's going to go run this code. Now this could be a mega function. It could have a million lines if you wanted. That wouldn't be a very good function. There'd probably be too much going on. But it would stop what it's doing and then it would go run this code. So now if I run this, we get hello world, right? It got into line 8 and it said, okay, I need to go to the function hello world. Okay, what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to console log hello world. Perfect. Any questions on sort of the very beginnings of function declaration, anything like that? So somebody asked, do your functions have to be, let's check it. Do your functions have to be written above? I don't believe so, because I think of the way JavaScript works. There's two things that could happen. Is either we're going to call it and it hasn't read this yet. And so it's going to say, I don't know what hello world is, right? You're kind of referring to something that don't exist, or JavaScript might kind of, it's what we call hoisting. We're not going to talk about it. And it might hoist the function and already know. So let's check it. Yep, it still works. What JavaScript does in the background is before it compiles, it kind of gets all these functions and kind of knows what's going on. But Corey's right, based on the language is a big deal here. So JavaScript, the way it works is using hoisting, but we don't need to talk about that. That's not even necessary. But great question. I love the way you're thinking. Cool. Okay. Now, the second thing I said is that we could have a parameter, right? And so within my function declaration, let's say that I wanted it to take in, just something. So here I want to also console log my name. So here I'm going to say that there is a parameter that we're expecting called name. And so now what happens whenever my function is called, as long as it's given the parameter, it's also called an argument. And so when we give a function a parameter, it's called giving it an argument. And then when a function is declared, this is a parameter. So argument and parameter are the same thing. So if I say argument, parameter, they're doing the same thing. It's just basically what part of the function call does that exist? Right here, it's an argument. Right here, it's a parameter. Cool. So now when my function does this name, anywhere within my code, I can refer to what was ever passed in. So if I say console.log name, whenever my function is called, whatever I pass it here, it will refer to that. So here, if I say will, it says will. Now notice, this says will, and this says name. When we are declaring a parameter, it could be anything we want. Now we want to be specific and we want to know what it is, right? We want to be able to, if a developer is reading our function, we don't want it to say unicorn and it refer to a name. That doesn't really make sense, right? They'll have a harder time working with our code. But if I wanted to, in theory, if I wanted to make this unicorn, as long as within my function I'm referring to it, this takes on the value of whatever's being passed in. So when it console logs unicorn, all unicorn is equal to is whatever the function was given. In this case, it is will. And so it will Let me save it. It console logs will. Okay. Any questions there?
Yeah, when I was doing it,
Oh,
I guess the only
if you
part
could
that
speak
I
up. If you could speak up just a little bit, I
oh
can't really hear you.
my mic wasn't okay.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. When I was reading it, this was I understood it eventually, but this was the part where it confused me a little bit because will is after. So me thinking I would think that I would put the parameter before the function, and then you give the function what to do. But when you put will after, I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly. Do you understand kind of what I'm saying?
Not quite. Remember, JavaScript reads this and it saves it for later, but it doesn't call the function, it doesn't run the function until we actually call it. And then we say, okay, I want you to call it, but in order for you to call it, it needs some information. Like if I left this blank, I'm probably going to get an error. Because, let's see, undefined. Because what's happening is I have this, and then when we get to like node our backend, that's not going to work because it's going to say, hey, you're calling a function that's supposed to have some information. But this doesn't, the order doesn't necessarily matter because this is indifferent, right? What's nice about it is it doesn't matter. Remember how we were talking about it being dynamic? We can pass in anything we want. It doesn't matter where this is called. I could call this for hello world Paul. And so each time the function is called, it's not that will always is unicorn. It's just within this function call, we pass in will, and then will becomes unicorn. Then when we go to line 10 and we do the same thing, well, we're giving it a new argument. It's still referred to as unicorn, but now it's Paul. So if I run this, I can run it and we should get hello world will, hello world Paul. This is dynamic, right? I can have any name I want, anything I want to pass in, I can do that. And it's referred to as unicorn. Let's go ahead and change that to name. So, if there's any confusion, adding in unicorn doesn't help either. So we'll put that name. Somebody said, can I insert? So there's quite a few questions in chat. So I love that. Somebody said, can you have a function within a function? Yep, we're going to get there. Somebody said, can you use a specific value within a parameter, like to only take in a number or a string? I don't think JavaScript has that. Now others do. And you can kind of, like I know Python, a newer Python can do that. And Paul's right. There's a type of JavaScript that is called TypeScript. And so that is what we call it. It compiles into, it's the same thing as JavaScript, but it kind of does that. You can say, I want this to be a string. I want this to be a integer, or I want this to be a Boolean. You can kind of declare that early, and it's really popular because it kind of cuts down on the errors. But that's a great question. Somebody said, can I insert a value without a parameter inside of the function? So I don't believe so, because, or you can, but it's not going to know what it is. So actually you can't, because it's going to say, let's see what the linter says. The function expect no argument, but was provided one. And so it's trying to say, hey, this function doesn't have any, like, it doesn't have an argument, but you're giving it one. So there's going to be an error there. There's going to be a discrepancy. Now let's try to run it, because this is just a linter, so it should still run. Let's see what happens. I'm going to get rid of that because it's not doing anything. So I do still get hello world. So yes, you can pass in information, but you're not going to do anything with it, right? Because my function doesn't have access to this value because I don't have anything to refer to it as. Great question, Caroline. Somebody said, so in a way, it's almost the same as a loop. Not really, because the function is really useful. It's reusable. So in a loop, it's dynamic in the same way. But a loop is just doing the same thing over and over and over again. This is a specified piece of code or logic that we want to refer to in different various parts within my development. Functions are the backbone of development. That is, everything is built within a function. If you go to Python or Java or JavaScript, everything is function based. This is the algorithm that you always hear about are functions. That's all it is. It's just a bunch of functions. So somebody said, can you explain the name again? Now that is just what we call a parameter. So if I want to give some information and I need my function to have access to some information, then we can pass it in a parameter. And then now whatever I pass in here is what we call an argument. And whenever I pass that in, we can say, okay, I want to refer to what was ever given to me. Let's refer to that as name. And so anywhere within my function, I can now refer to name. And then that will, that I can use that information. Yeah, Paul gave you a great explanation. Perfect. So somebody said, can you give multiple parameters? You absolutely can. You could have, functions, most functions will take in 8 or 9 or 10, like big function, take in 8 or 9 or 10. You'll only really take in like 3 or 4 within this bootcamp at kind of a max. But yeah, you could have multiple functions. The way you change the parameters, where you change it is you add another one is you just put a comma and then you put maybe age. And then now you have 2 parameters, name and age. And so if I put 31, oops. Now, whenever I call this function, I can refer to name and age. And I get Will 31 because I passed in 2 parameters. Now, one thing to note is when we have multiple parameters, and this is where I was going to head anyway, the order in which you pass these in is really important. So because name is first, the name here must be first. It's going to infer whatever the order you pass in whenever you call the function, it's going to infer that and match these as the same. So whatever's the first thing in front of the comma is going to be directed to age. The second thing after the comma is going to be is name. The second thing after the comma is age. So the other thing you can do is if you wanted to switch it up, you can. But you got to say something like this: age equals, and that's your parameter. Name equals Will. And so now, name is deprecated. But I would stick with just the order in which you do everything. So like right now, if I were to refer to this, you'll see it flipped, because if I were to just console log name, it's going to think it's 31. Here we go. But you can have a loop in a function. Absolutely, you can have a loop in a function. Are there any limits for how many parameters? Not really. Some arguments or some functions have lots and lots and lots. Do you have to mutate every parameter that you pass in a function? Absolutely not. So you can pass in information, or you can have a parameter and then maybe not use it. I guess the question would be like, let's say for this, right? We just were console logging name. You can do this. This will work just fine. But the question would be, well, then why are we even bringing in a parameter of age if we're not going to use it, right? So we want to make sure our code isn't just wasting. We're not just taking in too much. Think about like hiking. You don't want to pack too much, and then your hiking backpack gets a little bit heavy. So we want to be, we want to make sure. But yeah, if I don't refer to it, that's a-okay. My function will still work just fine. Okay, when you have 2 parameters, is there a good way to output the second parameter only? So you just call the second parameter. So if I just wanted to see age, I could say age. And then it's going to refer to that second parameter there. So somebody said, can you do a push if you want to change either name or age? Now remember, push is associated to arrays. And so the type that we've got here is a string and a integer and or number. So you don't need to push anything. So that would be yeah, it's a different type, right? Those are only associated to arrays. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and then we're going to talk about return, is when we're dealing with parameters, we have what we call a default parameter. So right now, name and age, we don't know what they are. So we're relying on whoever or whenever we're calling the function that we're going to pass in that information. We are relying on the function call to give me a name, and we're relying on the function call to give me an age. Now I can do what we call a default parameter and say John Doe, age 18. And so what this is this is what we call a default parameter. So now what that means is if I don't pass in any information, right? Now we saw that we need 2 parameters in order for this to run, right? In order for me to print age or console log age, I needed that. But when I have a default parameter, it's basically saying it's okay if we don't pass in a parameter, because this is what it will default to. If you pass in a value, it'll take on that new value. If you don't, it'll just default to age 18. So if I run this, it's going to work just fine. Perfect. It's going to see by default, it is 18. If I say name, we'll see that we also get John Doe 18. But let's say I didn't want to change the name, but I didn't want to change the age. So let's say Paul was just 18. Well, here we see that I get Paul, right? This says John Doe by default, but if I pass in a value, in this case, I gave a value, and remember, it's the first one, so it's referred to as name. So it says, okay, we're not going to do John Doe anymore. We're going to do Paul. But because I didn't pass in a second parameter, it's going to say, oh, I didn't get any age, so I'm just going to default to 18. So this is kind of a stopgap. This is what, when you're dealing with functions, this is very, very common that there be a default value, just to kind of make sure that a function doesn't break. So if you're seeing this in the wild, and you're kind of dealing with functions, this is a very, very, very common thing. Okay, any questions on parameters, default parameters, et cetera, et cetera? Can you guys put a 1 in the chat if this is making sense? Put a 0 if it does not.
Just one thing for me to clarify. So default would be like, let's say I go to a computer and it says in the parentheses name for you to enter your name. The default that they had put would be name. So when you enter something, you're giving it a new definition, right? So that's what I think of when I think of default, right? It's going to have something there as default until you enter something new, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Like in like in a website and stuff like that, right? Is that how they normally
Yeah.
use it?
So it depends. It depends on the function and what the function usage is, but same sort of ideology, right? If you've got user 1, right? You're setting up something on Facebook and you don't put a name, but it just refers to user 1. That's the default value, right? And then once you change it and say, no, my name is Lucas, then it says, okay, great, I will replace user 1 with Lucas. If you didn't pass in your name, you're like, I don't want you to have my information, then great, it's going to call you user 1 and you're good to go. If you do pass in your information, then it will take on that new information and it'll give you your name. So that's kind of the idea here within functions and default parameters. Good question. If you guys aren't at a 1, feel free to put in the chat, or you can, private message myself or Paul and just kind of let us know what we're dealing with, or what's kind of not making sense, and then we can kind of refer to that as well. Cool. Yeah, so you can kind of think about it as a placeholder if you wanted to. Lots of stuff that we're doing, you're not going to really use it as a placeholder, but yeah, you can think about it as a placeholder to make sure. And it's a whole idea behind a default parameter to make sure that if your function requires two values, 2 parameters to be passed in, and let's say my user, and we're relying on users aren't usually the most reliable. And they're only going to give us their name, but they're like, you're not going to know my age. Well, okay, we can default this and say, okay, we can still worry. It's kind of development is just thinking of all the ways that things could break, right? And then trying to prevent that. at the beginning, and then eventually you run your code and then it breaks in another way and you're like, I didn't even think about that. And it's all just creating code that will run even if users don't act perfectly or act the way that we would think a user would act. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is what we call return. So here we're console logging. We've done lots of console logging. And that is going to be great for what we're doing and us as developers. But it doesn't really do much, right? Because here my function is called hello world and it's doing some stuff and we're able to see that, but that's really it. And it's kind of just for development, here. Somebody did ask, why did it use hello world instead of John Doe? It did not. I just am console logging hello world as well. So that's very different, right? Than John Doe. It didn't take in John Doe. These are separate. John Doe is from name. So when it just did Paul, it was just, that's what changed the value. Hello world is separate. So we could even get rid of this just to fix any sort of confusion. Run this. And we just get Paul 18. Cool. But back to this. So console log will put stuff to our console, but that's really just for developers. The idea behind a function and what we're often going to do is we're going to run a function and it's going to give us back some value. And the idea that, okay, I want you to go do this and get me all of the numbers between 10 and 25 that are odd, right? And so it's going to do some sort of algorithm. It's going to do something and it's going to return back to us what we want to do, right? So in order for us to do that, we use a keyword called return. And what return does is it, again, gives us back a value. It returns back. We call the function, we say, hey, function. It goes and it does it, and then it comes and it gives us a gift. It returns back to us some piece of information. It can be anything. So it could be age plus, we'll do age plus 1. Cool. That's fine. So what will happen here is if I run this, this will work just like normal, right? It console logs Paul 18. And you're like, okay, well, the return didn't really do much. Well, it did, it returned, but when we call a function, the function call becomes whatever is being returned. So hear me out here. If I said, we're going to call this birthday function func, and we're gonna change this a little bit just because I think this will make a little bit more sense. Cool. Great. So let's say that I've got this function. This is actually doing something for me, right? Let's say that I'm on Facebook and Facebook has my age, and every day, you know, I put my birthday and then it checks, and then for everybody, if it's their birthday today, it runs this function to increase their age, right? And maybe we console log happy birthday, or we send some sort of message that says happy birthday, right? And then we want to say, but we also want to increment or increase the age of my user. So what we will do is it will return age plus 1, right? It's got some sort of functionality and it gives us back a new number. And maybe in our database, we say, okay, great, let's go ahead and update that. So if I wanted to see this, I could say birthday func, and I pass in maybe 30, right? Because by default, what it will do is this, it'll take this 30 and it'll replace this 18 with 30. It'll console log happy birthday and it'll give us back my new age. So maybe I could say something like let new age equals, and then we have our birthday func 30. Now, if I wanted to see this, and we'll see this, console.log new age. What this is doing is we're saying, okay, we have this function called birthday func that takes in an age. We're assuming they're at least 18. When we call this function, we want to say happy birthday. We're going to console log it, and then it's going to give us our new age, right? Our age incremented by 1. And so now maybe I want to do something with that. And so I say new age equals birthday func, so my function call, and then I passed in a new age of 30. And so now this variable of new age, right, this new thing that I'm going to put in my database, becomes whatever is returned from my function call. Well, what's returned from my function call should be 30 plus 1. So if I console log this, I should get 31. And I do. I get happy birthday because it came here, went up here, it console logged happy birthday. It returned and said, okay, this function call becomes whatever's being returned, which is 31. And if we're saying new age equals birthday func, well, what's being returned is 31. So basically we're saying is new age equals 31, right? Because that is age plus 1, and the age was 30. So if we console log new age, we get 31. So the big difference is console log will just show us in our console. It's great for debugging. It's great for developers. It does nothing for our users, right? Our users are never going to see a console log unless they go in and inspect our website and maybe they see it. Return is really, okay, a function has a purpose. It's doing something for me and then just giving me something back. So that's going to be a very common thing that we have. Any questions on difference between return and console log? There's one more thing on return I want to talk about, but any difference there? I'm going to pause. If there's any questions. Okay. So can anybody remember what does the break keyword do in a for loop? Anybody remember? Yeah, Thomas, it ends the loop, right? It's just done. Immediately stops. It stops that loop from existing and running anymore, right? So anything below that ceases to exist. Return operates the same way. Obviously, it's different than break, but if I have this here, you can already see this went dark. And it says unreachable code. The minute my function sees a return, it ends the function and returns that value. So if I had a million lines of code and my first one says return, it's not going to read the 999,999 or whatever it is. It's not going to read that. It's anything after a return. So if a return statement automatically ends my function, it's a big, big thing to know. So anytime my function sees a return statement, it is done with the function. Now, this is the last thing I want to do. And if this, I hope this doesn't confuse you guys. We can have conditional statements within my functions, right? So I could have, yes, Thomas, this is exactly what I'm doing. You already beat me to it. You can have conditional statements within a function. You can have for loops, you can have lots of stuff. What that means is I might have multiple return statements. So here, maybe I say if age is less than, I don't know, 30, then I want to console.log happy birthday, or let's say we'll even do this instead of console.log. Change this a little bit. We'll return I can't spell, you guys know that. I return happy birthday, young person, I don't know, live it up. Perfect. Great. Then I can say else. I can return get to bed and drink your prune juice. I see you old person. And if anybody's taking offense, I'm also in this boat, so no worries there. So here I've got multiple return statements, right? And so I can have multiple return statements, but the minute my function reads just one of them, the minute it reads one of them, it exits the function completely. The entire function, not just the conditional, the entire function. So please know that. Last thing I want to talk about functions, and then we will move on, is somebody already asked this, and I think it's a great question. So if I said, I'm just going to say something super easy, function, hello world, that does nothing, but say console.log, hello world. I can, within my function, I'm still within my function, but I'm not like with my if else. I can say hello world, and I can call a function within my function. Now, can anybody tell me why this is unreachable? Yeah, exactly, Lucas. Because my code is going to say if this, else this. So it's going to do one or the other, right? Both of these are going to happen. So if I were to put it up here, now what we'll do is, let's say that I've got, I'm gonna call this birthday message. I'm gonna birthday message. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to create this variable birthday message. I'm going to run this function. This function is going to take in this age, and it's going to say, okay, if age is less than 30, then I say, happy birthday, young person, live it up. If not, it's going to return, go to bed, drink your prune juice, young person. But before it does that, it reads this and it stops this function, and it comes here and it runs whatever's in this function. So it's going to run this whole thing. Once it's done running, it's going to come back, and then it does line 5. So we call this function. This function enters. We see this function. It stops my birthday func, comes to hello world, runs that. Once it's done, it comes back, and then it starts on 5 and then does whatever that function is. So if I were to run this, see what we get. We get hello world. So it ran my function. And then it gives me my birthday message. Go to bed and drink prune juice, you old person. Great. Because 30 is not less than 30, it's the same, right? Okay. Any questions on function? This is all I've got for functions, and then we'll jump into some exam practice. Any questions? So if you called, you could have an infinite loop of function calls. Yeah. That would be just an infinite loop. Yeah. Yeah. If you called, like, let's say hello world, I'm not going to run it because it'll break my computer and then I'll have to log off. But if hello world called birthday func, this is what we call an infinite loop, right? Because this is going to run. If I were to call birthday func, it's going to come here. It's going to call hello world. And then hello world is going to run, and it's going to call birthday func. And birthday func is going to call hello world, and hello world is going to run. It's going to call birthday func, and then you're dead. No, I literally will not, because it will break my. It'll break, and I'll have to get off of. I'll get off because it's called a Stack Overflow, right? Because you have too many things, and then your computer's like it can never break out of that. And it's what we call an infinite loop, and then you're done. You're done. Not really. You just have to turn off your computer. Your computer will get really hot. You have to turn off your computer, and I'll have to get off the Zoom, and it'll be a whole thing. We're not going to do that, but you could if you wanted to. Reheat. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Great question, though. I love this. I love that you see the world burn, Any other questions? Okay. How are we feeling? Do we want to do a 5-minute break or do we just want to jump in to exam practice? We just have 10 of these. I don't anticipate them taking too long, but we've got 10 of these. Anybody, how are we feeling? Do we want to break or do we want to break? Let's do a poll. That way people aren't. Oh. Okay, I just got a poll. What should we do? If you want to take a break, go ahead and hit that. Or if you want to continue, yeah, everybody needs a break. Okay. Oh, pretty. It's 59-41, pretty close. 57-43. Whoa. Yeah, even if everybody else, there's 89% of people, even if everybody else voted for continue, break would win. So we're gonna take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and we'll do this. Exam practice. So we will be back exactly at 5 p.m. PST.